Christmas in hospital. The one big difference in the early days of the NHS was the lack of technology. Basic nursing, so important to the welfare and recovery of the patient, was paramount. The hospital was a very limited pathological service of its own. Charlie, a resident of the workhouse buildings, made several trips a day on the bus to Wakefield with specimens. Extra extended duties were however expected. For example, the use of X-rays. At Staincliffe, during the early 1940s, this would be very much the role of the theatre sister. She would make the X-ray, and then one of the nurses would rush to the cellar to give it to the person who would develop it. 1930 saw the introduction of a 48-hour week for nursing staff in Dewsbury. It was reduced to 44 hours in 1958. Things improved after the war. The war years were interesting times. Nurses not only had to nurse, they also had to take their turn at fire watch. Special gas masks were issued, and if there was an air raid, the task would involve looking for fires from the roof. For happy times, each year the nurses at the local hospital was taken to the seaside, half going one week and the remainder the next. Those trips continued well into the 1960s. At Christmas time, there may have been a trip to pantomime, or if working at Dewsbury or at Staincliffe, actually taking part. Everyone looked forward to the annual Christmas dances and matron's fancy dress ball. The dances were a great sense of occasion, particularly in the 1950s and 1960s. The long dresses, silver shoes and even gloves. The fancy dress dances called for a great imagination and people were happy to oblige. One doctor and male nurse can be remembered for going as a bride and bridesmaid, attired in neck curtains and pink tulle with cauliflowers for bouquets. There has always been change, and more noticeable since the mid-1960s, and particularly from the 1974 onwards. One very fundamental change was the introduction of the Central Sterile Supplies Department at Staincliffe in 1964. Sterile packs of gauze, wool balls, instruments and jugs, to name but a few, were then available on request. It was some years after Dewsbury and Batley hospitals could appreciate the same luxury. Technology crept in with the introduction of heart monitors, machines to measure the blood pressure and pulse and resuscitation equipment. New drugs developed, including diuretics, which brought to an end the need of Southey's tubes. Such improvements and developments obviously impacted amongst the role of the nurse, and today is expanded to include many tasks that are previously thought to be very much the doctor's domain. Before the last war, the majority of patients were put to sleep by dripping either chloroform onto a gauze mask or with laughing gas. The anaesthetist was usually a general practitioner or perhaps a junior doctor, with little or no specialised training in anaesthesia, with no monitoring and available beyond the doctor's own senses, often diminished by pollution with anaesthetist gases. However, this was not to last. The need for specialist anaesthetists had been recognised during the Second World War. Many young doctors have been trained in anaesthesia during these difficult years and made an immediate impact on the return to civilian life. At the start of the health service, there was no full-time anaesthetist in Dewsbury. The majority of the work was done by the GPs on a sessional basis and the consultants coming out from Leeds General Infirmary, with the surgeons from major cases. By contrast, the Trust now has 14 permanent anaesthetists, 10 of them at consultant level and a further 5 doctors on aesthetic training programmes. As the pictures show, there was never a dull moment, with seasonal activities for staff and patients, including visits by Santa, concert parties and the hospital pantomime. Here it was Sleeping Beauty. The nurses' choir prepares to do its Christmas ward round. Merry Christmas.